All right, let's dive right into this explainer on the Gurjara-Pratihara dynasty. We're talking about an absolute political juggernaut that completely reshaped medieval India. When you look back at the grand sweep of early medieval history, it's honestly so easy to get lost in the sheer volume of kingdoms that constantly rose and fell. But the Pratiharas, they absolutely demand our attention. From roughly the 8th to the 11th century CE, they weren't just expanding borders, they were the custodians of a massive, sweeping cultural and religious renaissance.
So, the big question we're going to unpack today is how this specific dynasty preserved the political continuity of northern India against some seriously massive external pressures. When you consider just how fragmented the world was back then, the fact that they managed to act as the primary anchor for northern Indian political unity is just staggering. We don't just want to know that they survived, we want to figure out exactly how they pulled it off.
Because they did it for 300 years. Exactly 300 years acting as this massive bulwark of unity. And the mechanics of how they built and ultimately lost this empire is such a fascinating story. Seriously, this was no brief flash in the pan. We are talking about 3 centuries of incredibly complex diplomacy, grueling warfare, and stunning architectural patronage that literally left an indelible mark on Indian civilization.
To wrap our heads around this massive timeline, we've structured this explainer into 4 quick chapters. 1. The Shield of India. 2. The Fight for Kannauj. 3. The Golden Age. And 4. The Empire Fragments.
Starting right off with Chapter 1, The Shield of India. Let's look at how they actually earned that title.
Emerging back in the 6th and 7th centuries, they actually started out as regional feudatories, basically subordinate rulers, before finally consolidating their own power base in western India. Now, scholars are still actively debating their exact ethnic origins, like were they indigenous to the Gurjara-Pratihara region or were they tied to earlier migrations. But whatever their roots, their rise was swift. They started near the bottom in the Rajasthan-Gujarat borderlands, but through really strategic consolidation, they quickly transformed themselves into a formidable, totally independent power.
And here's where their PR strategy gets brilliant. The word Pratihara translates to doorkeeper or gatekeeper. They actively pushed this myth to legitimize their rule, literally casting themselves as loyal guardians against external threats. By tracing their lineage all the way back to Lakshmana from the Ramayana epic, they rooted their authority in a really powerful, widely recognized cultural narrative. They weren't just styling themselves as kings, they're presenting themselves as the divinely ordained protectors of the realm. And honestly, that image perfectly matched what they were about to do.
Because geopolitically, the arrival of Nagabhata I changed everything. By the early 8th century, Arab forces from the Umayyad Caliphate had established a really strong base in Sindh and were launching major eastward campaigns. Enter Nagabhata I. He successfully checked this expansion, putting together a massive coalition that stopped the advance dead in its tracks right before Rajasthan and Malwa. That incredible defensive stand stabilized the Indo-Gangetic frontier for centuries. They literally became the shield of the subcontinent.
With the western frontier secure, they turned their eyes east. Chapter 2. The Fight for Kannauj, and the infamous tripartite struggle.
So why Kannauj? Because whoever controlled Kannauj could claim to be the paramount sovereign of the entire Gangetic heartland. It was the absolute most coveted strategic and agricultural prize of the era. Ever since the days of Harshavardhana in the 7th century, this city carried enormous weight. It wasn't just about the vast wealth of the fertile Doab, that incredibly rich land between converging rivers. Taking Kannauj meant you held the symbolic heart of northern India itself.
But it wasn't easy. For 200 years, 3 massive empires fought over it, and geography pretty much dictated the whole thing. You had the Palas in Bengal, who were formidable but usually found themselves way overextended by the time they reached Kannauj. Then you had the Rashtrakutas down south in the Deccan. They were wildly powerful and would march north just to inflict devastating defeats, but they simply couldn't sustain an occupation that far from home. The Pratiharas, though, they had the home field advantage of geographic proximity, which let them establish much more durable control over the city.
It essentially became a historical Groundhog Day, a recurring cycle of attrition. The Pratiharas would conquer Kannauj, only for the Rashtrakutas to march north, smash them, and then retreat back south because of their own logistical nightmares, which, of course, allowed the Pratiharas to just walk right back in and rebuild. Now, constantly regaining the imperial city built immense prestige for the Pratiharas, for sure. But behind the scenes, this brutal cycle quietly drained their administrative and military resources for decades.
Yet somehow, despite all this grueling, multi-generational warfare, they hit their absolute peak. Chapter 3, The Golden Age.
This peak really belongs to Mihira Bhoja. His reign spanned almost 50 years and represents the true high-water mark of Pratihara power. He pushed the empire's borders from the Sutlej River all the way to the Narmada, and from Sindh right across to Bengal. But what's really cool is his chosen title, Adi Varaha. He literally presented himself as Vishnu's primeval boar avatar. It was this potent symbol of a ruler rescuing the earth and restoring cosmic order in a chaotic world. I mean, talk about brilliant political messaging, right? They even stamped it directly onto their silver coinage.
And we don't just have to take their word for it. The Arab merchant Suleiman visited around 851 CE and completely validated their might. He noted that the Pratihara army, fueled by a massive Central Asian horse trade through their northwestern frontiers, had a nearly unmatched cavalry. Suleiman's accounts also point out how prosperous the economy was, with abundant silver coinage circulating. So Bhoja hadn't just built a war machine, he had constructed a deeply wealthy, incredibly stable state.
When Mahendrapala I succeeded Bhoja, things shifted a bit. He pivoted the empire slightly away from just relentless military expansion and sparked a massive cultural renaissance. Kannauj became this thriving intellectual hub. They sponsored brilliant minds like the Sanskrit poet and dramatist Rajashekara, and poured wealth into developing Nagara-style temple architecture, the ones with those stunning curvy linear towers. This investment created artistic traditions that would quite literally influence northern India for centuries to come.
But as we all know, every golden age eventually hits a sunset. Chapter 4. The Empire Fragments. To understand the fall, you have to look at the structure itself. The Pratiharas relied heavily on a vast network of feudatory or samantas rulers. Now, this system was a massive double-edged sword. It let them expand incredibly fast across a huge, diverse territory without needing to directly administer every single village. But it was basically a house of cards. It relied 100% on the perceived strength of the central king. If the center started looking weak, well, those autonomous chiefs suddenly had every incentive to just break off and assert their own independence.
And sure enough, that weakness eventually materialized. Messy succession disputes after the Golden Age, combined with the immense, long-term attritional costs of the tripartite struggle, finally hollowed out the imperial center. The tipping point came around 916 CE, when the Rashtrakutas actually succeeded in sacking Kannauj again. It dealt a catastrophic, highly visible blow to the empire's prestige. That was the moment the feudatory chiefs smelled blood in the water and began quietly recalibrating their loyalties.
From there, it's just a domino effect over the next century. You have the 916 CE sack, followed by decades of internal erosion as feudatories slowly peel away. And then comes the final, devastating blow, the well-organized Ghaznavid incursions. In 1018 CE, Mahmud of Ghazni attacks, and the Pratihara ruler literally flees Kannauj without offering any sustained resistance. That cowardice starkly exposed that the dynasty was entirely hollowed out. By the mid-11th century, the once mighty Pratiharas just vanish entirely from historical records.
But here's the silver lining. The empire didn't collapse into a total political vacuum. It shattered into these incredibly vibrant, celebrated Rajput successor states. You had the Chandelas, who went on to build the breathtaking Khajuraho temples, the Paramaras established amazing centers of learning, and the Chauhans became a major powerhouse in Rajasthan. So the end of the Pratiharas was really a transition into a highly decentralized new age, one that was deeply, deeply shaped by the cultural and administrative blueprints the Pratiharas left behind.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. When an empire physically falls, but its artistic, its political, and its architectural legacies survive so robustly in the states that replace it, did it actually fail? Or did it just evolve into something new? The Shield of India might have ultimately fractured, but those pieces went on to define an entirely new era of history. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.